I don't know about you, but I can never have enough top-down tokens for my virtual tabletop games. There are some great artists out there producing amazing content, but there's always going to be those players or those NPCs that you create that don't fit the mold for some of the tokens that are already out there. So, Hero Forge to the rescue. What's up, gamers? I'm Josh, this is Copper Dragon Games, and on this channel we talk about Dungeons & Dragons, usually virtual tabletop resources. In this video, I'll be showing you how to use Hero Forge to create top-down tokens for your virtual tabletop experience. Let's jump right in. So let's look at the first of those three ways you can turn a Hero Forge miniature into a top-down virtual tabletop token. Regardless of how you want to do this, you want to create your miniature first. Make sure that it is colored and make sure that it looks good from the top down. There are some poses and things that look kind of awkward when you look at them from the top, or maybe you'll have a weapon that that you can't really see if you don't pose the miniature in a certain way. But we're not going to get into that. I want to look at the actual process of converting it to a file format that you can put in your virtual tabletop. The first way to do it requires having a subscription to Hero Forge, but it is by far the easiest way to go about it. If you have a subscription, you have access to the little booth menu here on the left. You can click that, and you have a couple of options, the portrait and the token. And the token is what we want to go to. And this automatically resizes, changes up your character so that it fits in that space. You do need to go over and make sure you have the transparent background put on, blank token. And for our purposes, you also want to go over to camera and make sure you have top down selected. Now you can zoom in just a bit, resize it a bit, but you want to try to make sure that the character's head is at the center of the space. That way, if you resize it within your virtual tabletop, it won't get all awkward and weird and have your character not line up with the center of the grid space that it's in. But from here, once you have it lined up, you just click the capture button and it creates an image file from this that you can just put into your tokens folder or wherever you keep it and start using it in your game. The next method is very similar to this one, but that is to use the portrait to get a similar image file. So if you're using the portrait, normally you would use it to set up like a character portrait like this, where you might see some background, all that good stuff. But for this, we want to flip the token so that we're looking down on it from above, click on transparent backdrop, and then zoom in so that it fits in the space. This method is almost exactly the same as using the token tool, but it takes an extra step because we've got to change the camera. But the output is slightly different, and we'll talk more about why you may want to use this instead of the token tool later in the video. From here, all you have to do is click the capture button just like you did for the token tool, put it in the folder it needs to go in, and use it in your virtual tabletop. The third method we're going to talk about does not require a subscription to Hero Forge's services. It does require a couple extra steps, but it's not really that difficult. You just go over to any of the other menus where you would have been editing the character itself, rotate it so that it is so that we're looking down at the token, zoom in as much as you can, and then use a screen capture tool to get this image. Unlike the other two steps that you have to pay for, we're not quite done here. Technically, we could put this directly in the tabletop and it would work, but you have this blue background behind the character that you'll still be able to see on the tabletop. So we want to get rid of that. A lot of people will probably direct you to a program like Photoshop for this, and it is like the premier image editing software out there. So I used to do this kind of thing with GIMP, but I've actually found another tool that makes this process even easier than removing the background in GIMP, and that is an online program called Pixlr. So if you head over to pixlr.com, you'll get lots of different options here. For this, we're just going to be using Pixlr X, quick and easy graphic design. And all we're going to do is open that image that we just took with our screenshot tool. We're going to head over to the Cutout tool and use Magic Cutout, and we just click on any of this blue stuff and it gets rid of all of it with one click. Now you may notice when I did that, I also lost a little bit of the armor itself, and if you run into that issue, you can adjust the tolerance over here on the left, In this case, we want to undo that first, then go back to the tolerance, bring it down to maybe 10. The right number to use here is actually going to depend heavily on how closely the colors in your figure match the background. But we'll drop it to 10, click here again, and see all the background disappear. But we didn't lose any of the armor this time, which is awesome. And we could be done right here. I could click save and just be done with the whole process. However, I do think it's easier and better in the long run if you adjust one more thing, and that is the layout and template. You can go up to that and click canvas resize and pick the bigger number and just make the two match, which turns your image into a square. This just ensures that your token will fit more appropriately on the grid once you're in Foundry or whatever virtual tabletop you're using, without having to make a lot of adjustments later on in the program. So we're going to save this to a Foundry folder and then open up Foundry and look at these options and compare all three versions. So now we bring it over to Foundry and we have all three versions on the screen side by side, or at least on the screen at the same time. And we're going to look a little bit at the differences between them. I do have image hover turned on and the image size turned pretty high up so that we can get quick preview images, larger images, because if you're looking at the screen just like this, there really isn't that much difference between them. And the only adjustment I had to make was with the two that were from portrait and screenshot. I did adjust the token size to 1.1 so that all three tokens would be about the same size relative to one another. Because the portrait and screenshot images had a little more padding, a little more transparency around the edges, they end up looking a little smaller in this format. You can fix that by adjusting the original images and cropping out some of that padding around the edge, but I didn't take the time to do that this time. So just know that if you bring these in and you realize that they look a little smaller than you think they should, it is really easy to adjust the size here under your portrait configuration. And I did pull up the token that was already on the scene. So if you're brand new to Foundry, it's really important to know that if I edit this token here, it's only editing this instance of the token. If I ever dragged the character back out onto the screen, it would not retain those changes. So if you're editing a token that you think you're going to be using a lot, you want to edit it over in the Actors tab, because then you're fixing the prototype token, which is more or less your default settings for that character's token. Anytime you add that character to a scene, it will retain the size differences or the coloration differences or whatever settings you've got set for it. We are zoomed in quite a bit here, and I'll zoom in the rest of the way just so you can see the differences between the tokens on screen as you would see them as you were playing the game. And you can see here there's really not that big of a difference between the three. You may be able to tell that the token that was created with the token tool is a little fuzzier, a little less sharp than the other two images, but other than that, it's not that big of a difference. The one that was created with the token tool does have a small shadow under it, which you don't get with the other options unless you add it manually. But it's just a plain circular shadow. It doesn't match the pose of the miniature. No matter how you pose it, it's always just going to be a circle. So I don't really see that as a big positive. You can tell with image hover that there is definitely a difference in resolution between the three different styles. The screenshot and the portrait, there's a slight difference. The screenshot is slightly better, but it's not enough to really be noticeable even when you're zoomed in with image hover. The token, on the other hand, is a little fuzzy. It's kind of obvious that it was not made the same way. But again, when you're in the middle of the game, when you're in the midst of the game, you're not really going to be looking that closely to see the image quality. You can tell being zoomed out this much that it's the same character in all three tokens, and they all look pretty good. The biggest difference here, of course, is how much time you want to spend in creating them. The bottom two obviously are much quicker than having to go through the background removal, but even the background removal, if you're using Pixlr, is just not that hard. It's super fast. And anybody can do it with a program like Pixlr, which is online. You could even do it on a Chromebook or a cell phone. If you found this video useful, helpful, and want to support the channel, I want to encourage you to click like and subscribe below, leave me some comments, get in on the conversation. But if you really want to support the channel, I want to encourage you to head over to Patreon. Patrons of Copper Dragon Games get a complimentary copy of any drive-thru RPG product that I produce, as well as access to the full version of Copper Dragon Horde, which is a collection of homebrew 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons material that I've been producing and that will continue to grow as time goes on. I'm so grateful to my patrons for the support that they show this channel and me and all the work I'm doing as I create more video content and more drive-thru RPG content. Thank you to everyone who has supported the channel thus far, whether you're a Patreon supporter or not. I've really enjoyed creating these videos and drive-thru RPG content over the past year, and I'm looking forward to another year of doing more, better, bigger things.